Welcome back to the Ignite Agility podcast. Today I have with me Shannon Cross. Hey, Shannon.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about your current position and what you're up to, and then we'll get right into the topic for today.
Great, yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here. So overall, I have close to 20 experience of managing teams and initiatives, products and service creation across a variety of sectors and industries, including technology verticals that specialize in data as well as software. Currently, I am the Vice President of Operations at a local ISV located right here in Minneapolis called Without Wire Inventory Sciences. And we provide SaaS and mobile solutions for warehouse and inventory management that includes manufacturing, distribution, field service. I'm really excited to be a member of the team. That the company's growing. We're really, it's an exciting place to be, and I'm happy to bring my skills into the organization. I am a certified Scrum Master, and I am a certified Scrum Product Owner as well.
Nice. So you speak our Scrummy language.
I do, yeah, a little bit, enough, I think.
So that's part of the appeal of having someone such as yourself on the podcast today, because one of the things that our constituents and viewers continually ask is, how do I speak to my leaders? How do I speak to my leaders about Agile or Scrum without mucking it up, without, throwing up a bunch of lingo on them or making them defensive? How do we really set this up for success? And you've identified a couple steps that you see as common mistakes. So let's start with your first one. What's kind of the first one that you think is a big miss when people are trying to talk to their leaders about this stuff?
Yeah, so I think that one big miss is not really fully reaching for understanding in either direction. I think it can go both directions. Either the leader is having some trouble reaching for understanding, or the team member or that product owner is having trouble reaching for understanding. But the perspective I want to bring is that team member or that product owner reaching for understanding with a leader. So, when I think about somebody coming into a space where Agile is either new or they're helping with the transformation, or maybe there's just leaders that aren't familiar with it, even though it is not new at a company. I think that that you're coming in as a change agent, right? There's an element of that to the role. And I think that when you're a change agent, you often find yourself in a place of negotiation. And I know that word can sound a little intimidating, but it really just means striving for understanding and finding common ground in order to move forward. That's
a good way of putting it.
It doesn't have to be antagonistic. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to entrench in your thinking. And you really want to respect the experience, the breadth of success, the breadth of knowledge that that leader brings into that company that you're working for.
Right.
Because, yeah, they're in the role for a reason. They've got successes under their belt. They've kind of grown up in their career. So you want to really listen, and you want to figure out where their concerns are and where their interests are. For example, when I have talked to leaders to help them kind of understand the world of Agile and what it can bring, as I'm talking to them about things and listening to their concerns or their objectives, I think I've tried to pay attention to, is there something they're saying where they seem really excited? Or is there something they're saying where they seem like kind of agitated maybe, or particularly confused? And, to the extent possible, read body language and hear the words they're saying, and then provide information for both the hot button issue or concern and the thing that they're excited about as it relates to working with Agile, working in the Agile framework.
Nice.
Yeah. And get to know them a little bit as people.
That's a big one. I tell that to people all the time. They're human. Because sometimes people build up this whole story in their head, right? About, putting this leader up, just because they're on the box on the org chart, and then this fear factor weighs in. It's like, they're people. They are human beings just like you.
Yeah, exactly. We're all just people working to make things happen and be successful. And so I would invite C-suite executives to have coffee with me, or when we could all work in an office together to join me in the cafeteria for lunch, or, and I've had some great conversations with, vice presidents of various divisions, with the president of one of the companies that I worked for. We would talk often. And yeah, and you end up really building good rapport. And the more you can build some rapport, and the more you can help them understand in ways that make things understandable to them. And I'll touch on one point when it comes to striving for understanding, which is people think about things differently from me, from you.
Mm-hmm.
So ask them directly, like, what kind of presentation of information do you like? Do you actually, that you absorb well, the easiest? Because executives, they have very little time. They've got a lot going on. They want the quick hits, and you can represent that. Maybe they're very visual and they like graphs and charts.
Right.
Or maybe they're a little bit more like scholastic, if you will. They like to read some things. So you can offer a PowerPoint presentation that might be more wordy than you might do otherwise. And key metrics. What metrics are they most interested in? And help them first understand what that metric translates to in Agile, and then show them those metrics that they're most interested in. Make things as visible as you can to that person.
That's great advice, because not everybody interprets information the same way. There's a CIO I used to coach, and he doesn't know it. But as much as I helped him understand Agile, he taught me how to speak to executives without saying a word. Because I would go into his office and I would start throwing up Scrummy language on him. And he would roll his eyes. He'd go, look at his watch and go, top 3 things you need right now. But top 3 things, Angela. And like the 3rd time he did that to me, I went, oh, I should come prepared with those top 3 things and then leave.
Right.
So it took a minute to go, this is the way he wants the information. He wants it in sound bites. If he has questions, he'll ask, be brief, be clear, be gone.
Exactly right. And then you become essentially a trusted advisor to that leader, because you're speaking the language. You've either shared with them what it means, and you're presenting information to them in a way that they understand. And that's really what you want as a team member, or as a leader in a Agile space, trying to help others come on board.
Awesome. The second mistake you mentioned to me when we were chatting about having this conversation is the danger of assumptions.
Yes, absolutely. So I have fallen victim to this myself, self-inflicted wounds, I guess you could say.
Right.
Where, I'd walk into a room and I would assume that folks in the room were understanding a process the same way as I did, or have similar excitement level about a particular initiative, or even have the same goals for the outcomes of the initiative. And I would come in basically kind of like more, if you had to kind of put it on a spectrum between you tell me what to do and I'm going to tell you what to do, and the middle being I have a suggestion that we can all pick apart. I kind of skewed, before I learned better, toward the you tell me what to do kind of, side of that spectrum. And then I quickly learned, wait a second, I can come here with the straw dog, if you will, the idea, the common ground. At least if nobody likes the thing that I put out there as what we could start as common ground, at least there's common ground and nobody liking it, right? And then we kind of go from there and have the conversation about what the understanding is in the room, what the objectives are in the room, what the buy-in is in the room. And I was reading a book by a gentleman named Neil Perkin called Agile Transformation. And it's a very technical book for folks that are Agile practitioners to bring in transformational change into an organization. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, but there's one point that is relevant to this particular area where folks can kind of focus, which is mapping your context.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got a formula for how to do that. There's a lot of those kinds of things out there. His happens to be you explore, execute, extend, and then exploit, which is basically take advantage of what you learn for success. So that's one framework. There's many out there, but the concept of not making assumptions,
right,
and understanding your context are key, I think, to helping your leader understand what benefits Agile will bring to that company and to bringing value to your client ultimately, which is what every company is striving to do. And a key thing that I've learned is you also want to have in that mapping, in your thinking, understand the leader's level of buy-in to the change of having Agile in the workplace. Even if Agile's been there for a while, they might be a stakeholder that wasn't really keen on the idea, so there's some resistance there. And again, that circles back around to have a conversation, get to know them, think about understanding their concerns and their desired outcomes, not just their positions, and then present data, present case studies, however they learn best.
right.
Help them understand Agile.
Something in what you just said also kind of circled back to the previous ideas about, hey, this doesn't have to be adversarial. Hey, this doesn't have to be, when you say negotiation, some sort of pushback. Because if you do get into the conversation and assumptions are being made about what the intent of the meeting is about, what the intent of the goal is, then it can almost start off that way, where so it might seem like they're resisting, or it might seem like they're challenging when they're not. They're really looking for information, but it's coming across in a way that makes us assume, oh, they're arguing with me, when they may not be.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you talked about that, I thought of a couple different instances in different sectors, private sector, and public sector jobs that I've had. And for very different reasons, leaders that I talked to would seem to be either answering my question in a very clipped kind of way, or answering it in what seemed to be somewhat of a pushing back
right.
And I
almost a defensive position.
A little bit. And it confused me. I was like, why is this happening? Like I'm here, I'm of the entity of either the governmental agency or of the company. I believe I'm trustworthy. I believe I've earned the trust. Why are you either not answering or kind of seeming to be confrontational in your answer or defensive in your answer? And I thought about it a little bit, and I realized that sometimes there are things like regulations or intellectual property concerns,
Mm-hmm.
or other concerns that a leader would have that at the time I didn't have insight to, go to market timing concerns, things like that, like various parts of the context that I didn't have. And so when I realized what the context was better in those situations, I realized they were actually giving me the best answers that they could and the best information that they actually could give me
Mm-hmm.
at the time, for whatever the reason was. And when that clicked, I thought, well, I don't want to go into the next conversation with my own air of defensiveness when I've realized that they're meeting me where they can meet me.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I work in that frame to move things forward?
Right. Yeah. So the phrase we like on our team is, do you know that for sure? What do you know for sure? Because it's like, because they'll say, well, they're just not telling me this. Do you know that they're just not telling you because they don't want to?
Right.
Or is there an actual reason? The other one that I've thought of is publicly traded companies where they have shareholders. And especially when those companies are in divestiture mode. So, for example, there was a publicly traded company we worked with that shall remain nameless to protect the guilty. And prior to engaging with them, we noticed they were selling entire divisions, just selling them off. And we had some of the mid-level managers and some of the Scrum Masters and product owners, like you talked about, in the room. And they kept saying things like, our leaders want us to be successful. They want us to succeed. And I said, do you know that for sure? And they all got mad at me, of course. And I said, what happens if you don't succeed with this initiative? What happens? This division's the next one to get sold. And what happens then? Well, the shareholders will get paid. Some of the leaders may get paid. You could have heard a pin drop when they all came to the realization that maybe we're not supposed to succeed because everybody's got stock options. Everybody's got a little payday if we get sold. And it was just like, so until you know for sure, until you sit down and find out exactly what the drivers are, yeah, you're telling yourself a story.
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. And I would hope that the leader that you're working with or leaders that you're working with have the ability to be as transparent as possible and really give you the real answer. I would hope that that's
to the extent that they can, right?
They're able to, exactly. Yeah. But yes, absolutely. I like that. Do you know that for sure? And and look for the facts.
So then, Shannon, you've got this wonderful list of translations. So to help some of our listeners out who are saying, give me really specific examples. So if I were to say, as a Scrummy person who speaks Scrum, if I were to say something like increment or milestone, what does that map to for a leader? What might they hear, or what might that be a common phrase that we can use to translate for each other?
Sure. Yeah. I think that what I've seen happen from time to time, and have heard from former colleagues and friends, is that folks that are new to the Agile framework think that it's somewhat ruleless or lawless or sort of
right, just inmates running the asylum, right? Woohoo!
that is not true at all. And if you're in an environment where that seems to be what's going on, then that is not anything in the Agile framework that is happening. So that's the first thing. And if you have a leader that's confused or concerned, just say that. If that's what you think that is, if you see that happening, that is not what anything in the Agile framework is. I'm here to make it happen for real. So that's I think is kind of a core thing that I've picked up over time. But there's some specifics. So like to your point, program increments or releases very often can be mapped to something that many executives understand, which is roadmaps and milestones.
Yep.
The language is a bit different, but in practical terms, it's very much the same thing, very similar. So if you're in your team, your Scrum team, and you all know the vernacular and vocabulary, and you're talking about that next program increment or the next release, when you go report up to your product owner or hire, use some language that they'll understand as you're helping them acclimate to the new vocabulary. So milestones as program increments or releases. Another one I have is change management as backlog prioritization, particularly product backlog prioritization. Right. So there are a couple different things that people might hear when they hear the word change management. One is one that I referenced earlier, which is coming into an organization doing organizational change management as a change agent. That's not what I'm referring to when I say change management as product backlog prioritization.
No, you mean more like the change order, change request, the old terms that we would have to get signed off before we could pivot.
Exactly, right. So when you're working with a leader who's responsible for, particularly these product owners, responsible for product backlog prioritization, and they're coming to you saying, we need to get this thing in, this feature in now, and you want to help them understand, hey, we're mid-sprint right here. We got to wait for the next sprint, but let's get that up the queue, high priority when we go into our next sprint planning meeting, and pull that from the product backlog as high priority, get it into that next sprint. And they said, well, we used to fill out a form. And I was like, understood. That's change management. The exact same thing happens with product backlog prioritization. We have a system. We have either the board on the wall, or we have a Azure DevOps program, or we have Jira, whatever we have that we use as a system. We use that system.
We've got it.
Tools and prioritize. The other one is rolling wave versus iteration.
Or sprint, because iteration and sprint can be synonymous, but sometimes they like those old project management terms, which is rolling wave. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And rolling wave is kind of this concept in project management of an iteration. I mean, it's basically the exact same thing. You're rolling through and cycling through various stages of a project inside of the larger project waterfall structure. It's like tiny little waterfalls inside of the whole project. Iterations, sprints, it's time boxed pieces of work getting done in a priority order, but you happen to be able to include everything you need from that use case and the user story to QA being right there in the team, to whomever is a part of the business that's a business stakeholder being in the team, all the way through testing, all right in that same little, that increment, that sprint, or that little rolling wave. So I think it maps pretty clearly. So if you have a leader that's used to PM talk, help them understand that this is that, but better, because you got QA sitting there right with you. You've got testing. You might have even done test-driven development. And then you're not throwing something over the wall where you figure out something didn't work after you've built out a whole bunch of this product. You're figuring it out faster. So rolling wave versus iteration, or as iteration. And then time or size estimates as velocity. So again, you want your leaders are going to want to stay on time and on budget, and they're going to want to keep things focused in terms of scope. And how do you know that things are happening on time? And therefore, in many cases, keeping within a budget, right? Well, we track velocity when we're doing software development or other service or product development using Agile frameworks. And velocity really is just sorting out how you're moving through these pieces of work, how quickly or slowly, or what that looks like. What's your rate of work as you're moving through building these things out?
So on the topic of velocity, it sounds like you understand it because you described it perfectly. A lot of times what happens is leaders misuse it as some sort of measuring stick to beat the team with, or they'll say, your bonuses are tied to this, your incentives are tied to this, and then all of a sudden the velocity starts getting gamed, right? It starts getting, it looks amazing. No work is getting done, which is the whole point of that measurement. But our velocity looks great. So, sometimes we have to make sure that if leaders are going to understand, it just means scope in relation to time, it has to be used as intended and not misused.
Yeah, that's a good one. And what I think of is when the importance of having dedicated teams or product increment and program increments and sort of development trains. There's various terminology and various aspects of Agile. If you go scaled Agile, if you don't, whatever. When I think of dedicated teams and I think of velocity, there is potential, depending on the product and how mature it is within an organization, how experienced that team is, having a dedicated team on a product, I can see the impulse of a leader to say, well, you need to tell me what your velocity generally is so I can anticipate how long this whole thing's going to take. I get that impulse. I probably would do that myself, to be honest. I don't want to pretend like I'm a master of, and I think that the member of the team, that's the Scrum Master or that product owner or whatever, whomever, that this advice can be best heeded by, help that leader understand when that can work and when that cannot work.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
And talk about ranges to the extent you can. Figure out if you can figure out ranges. That helps. That's helped me in the past a lot, of time or velocity, because they throw a new feature in, even if it's a really established product, that could kind of throw your whole trends in a different direction.
Nice. Thank you for that.
Sure, yeah. Another one is deadlines as time boxing. So this is a little bit to unpack this. I'd say deadlines always have to do with a scope of work. Like you need to have something done within a period of time, and scope of work needs to be prioritized. So you need to make sure you got your priorities so that as you're doing your sprint planning and you identify and define your sprint as that time boxed duration, then you can most easily map deadlines to time boxing in a per sprint sense and in a full sort of birth of a product
Right.
sense. Budgets is budgets. You know what? There's just not, there's budgets.
And I always try to tell people that sometimes your organization may be misusing the term budget because there's forecasting and then there's budget. So if what they're calling budget, do they really mean forecast? Because budget is licensed to spend. You've been given this, you can spend it. So Agile or no Agile, the organization might be misusing budgets.
That's a really good point. I agree. I hadn't thought of that when kind of putting this list together, but I definitely agree with you. So you want to make sure when you're using that word, everybody's using it the same.
Right? Because if we're sprinting, we're spending. Yep. So budget is licensed to spend.
Exactly. And again, it comes right back to how you spend your money is based on prioritizing. Mm-hmm. And that's the same no matter what you're doing. No matter if you're working on something that you have an agile framework wrapped around to get the work done, or more of a project management framework, or a marketing campaign that's using neither one of those. You have money to spend and you have to prioritize where those dollars are going to go.
Absolutely.
Lessons learned as retrospectives. I mean, I think this one's pretty straightforward. Retrospectives really are a time to look back at that piece of work getting done at that sprint. You can even do release retrospectives. Often inviting that leader to a release retrospective is really important. They are the client in many ways, at least inside of your organization. So help them see what's been done and see the transparency you have in a team. Help them see that in terms of being realistic about feedback within the group, and what went well, what's going to be improved on in the next sprint or the next program increment or the next release.
And that's the nice thing about lessons learned from a traditional project versus like a sprint retrospective in Scrum, because you get to immediately take advantage of what you just learned with the exact same people. Whereas sometimes, as a card carrying project manager, I can tell you, we did it at the end of a project and then the team's all dispersed, broken up, and now we can't really immediately take advantage of those things necessarily because we're with different people, or some of it doesn't apply. And it's after the fact. Hindsight's 2020, as they always say, right? So the lessons learned being used right away.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it reminds me of working in a strategic program management office and working with teams in the technology division of this organization, where the strategic program office had the framework that was very much like PMI, but we knew that within execution and planning, quite frankly, there needed to be use of teams that were used to operating as Scrum teams. So basically that bimodal or hybrid approach that maybe many of your listeners are accustomed to. And we realized that within those bimodal projects, we needed to do lessons learned events more often. Mm-hmm. So we started doing them after each phase. I keep using air quotes here, each phase.
That tells people that you're doing the translation, because so many times people new to this stuff latch on to the new vocabulary and they don't realize there are ways to say this that make sense to people who haven't gotten the education you just got in your CSM or your CSPO. So that's awesome. It's perfect.
Right. Yeah, right. So we ended up doing them in between a couple critical stages: planning to execution to monitoring. And then of course, these retrospectives were happening in the Agile team. And then we ended up rolling that into other more waterfall projects where we started doing these lessons learned in between various stages. So I think, the Agile framework makes it far more straightforward, I think, because your event happens at prescribed times all the time. You don't have to sort of guess where a best time would be
Right.
to put that in your whole of your work. But yeah. And then the other one I have is the definition of done. I think it's a universal concept. I think, however, getting the definition is going to be challenging, even if everybody understands they want something to be completed.
Right. I equate it to ordering a steak. Because I'm like, even if I get a bunch of carnivores agreeing on medium rare, I'm like, okay, you go ahead, Shannon, and describe medium rare. Okay, Angela, you describe medium rare. And you hear two completely different definitions, yet you both said medium rare. You both said done.
Yeah. Yes. Good analogy. I like that. I think that.
No disrespect, vegans.
Well, I can't speak for all vegans. I can speak for myself. And no offense taken. I understand the analogy. It's all good. I think that I think defining anything with another stakeholder or a group of stakeholders has challenges inherently. So really bring to bear any facilitation tools that you might have, help them understand what done means in the context of a sprint versus a release or a program increment.
Mm-hmm.
And then figure out what does done mean for the product. And sometimes, that is something that has to be emergent. And it
can change.
Exactly right. And that can be handled within an Agile framework, I believe, far more economically and efficiently than in some other frameworks that are out there. Because you're always looking to bring some piece of functional product, some piece of functional value into the marketplace with each release. And if things shift and change, you can embrace that emergent change and keep your leader on the same page with you and find success and satisfaction and job well done.
Nice. Well, Shannon, you have given us quite a few tips and tricks here to help people reframe conversations with their leaders and hopefully achieve that understanding. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. It was great. I had a great time, and thank you, Angela.